come early today, and if you remember, today is Friday 13th. System was down and nothing did work. So Brian was so fabulous, and it took for him some time, but he fixed the problem, so we can start our presentation. We will talk today about the female brain. I don't have any personal or professional financial relationship or commercial interest to disclose. During my presentation, I will use the Institute of Medicine definition of sex and gender. Sex is issued to describe distinction in biology between men and women, and gender is rooted in biology and shaped by environment and describe one's self-representation as male or female. Most people are intrigued by the thought processes of the opposite sex. Despite rumors to the contrary, men and women are from the same planet. However, there are many differences between the brains of men and women. So how does the brain of female look and function differently from male's brain, and what accounts for these differences? Overall, brain volume is greater in men than women. The male brain is typically about 10% larger than female brain, and females have greater density than males, so their neurons packed more tightly. Also, the extra mass does not give males more processing power. This doesn't make men more intelligent. Rather, science believes the reason for increased brain mass is to accommodate the bigger body mass and muscle group of the male. Many studies have been performed to evaluate the size of the different brain regions. Kelly and colleagues in 2007 reviewed available neuroimaging studies from 1980 to 2006 to evaluate the difference for the existence for sex differences in the living healthy human brain. The gray-white matter ratio was consistently higher in frontal, temporal, parietal, and occipital lobes, cingulate gyrus, and insula in women versus men. Thicker gray matter in the parietal cortex in women versus men has been consistently showed and is evident across the lifespan. Gray and white matter volumes vary by sex. Women have a higher percentage of gray matter after correcting for intracranial volume, height, and weight, whereas men have a higher percentage of the white matter. There are some studies that contradict these findings. For example, no sex differences was reported when controlling the brain size in total gray matter volume, and one study reported greater gray matter volume as a percentage of total intracranial volume in men versus women. I'm sorry, wrong button. Other study led by Dr. Rugrock performed a quantitative review of the brain imaging literature testing overall gender differences in total and regional brain volumes. They searched all articles published between 1990 and 2013, and the result is the male on average have a larger total brain volume, absolute volumes in the intracranial space, total brain volume, cerebrum, gray matter, white matter, cerebellum. This slide shows regional sex differences in gray matter volume. Red color displays brain areas where gray matter volume larger in females, and blue color displays brain area where gray matter volume larger in males. So looking closer, differences in volume between the sexes were located in several regions. This included part of the limbic system and the language system. Behavioral and skill performance. Gender differences in human behavioral show adaptive complementarity. Men have better motor and spatial abilities. whereas women have superior memory and social cognition skills. Men are often less socially adept and are more task-oriented thinkers than women. Many men are sharply left brain dominated, while women tend to be more evenly balanced between left and right brain processing. Women are therefore thought to be slightly more intuitive and sometimes better communicators. Why men excel in certain tasks and women at others? Verma and colleagues in 2014 proposed that sex differences in brain connectivity can explain some contrast in human behavioral and skill performance. The goal of the study was to understand complex interactions among brain regions and to compute a structural connectome. Researchers used a fiber tractography with diffusion tensor imaging technique, and this slide shows schematic of the pipeline of creating the structural connectome, which looks like on slide number 5, I'm sorry. So researchers studied the population of 949 healthy subjects aged 8 to 22 years old. Additionally, the other goal of this study was to examine developmental sex differences. For this reason, the population was divided into 3 age-related groups, which corresponded roughly to the developmental stages of childhood, adolescence, and young adult. This photo was issued by University in Pennsylvania researchers is showing the brain connections. On the top, the blue color shows man intrahemispheric connections. Connections with an intracranial hemisphere were strong, but connections between 2 hemispheres were weak. In females, which is pictured on the bottom, interhemispheric connections shown by orange color. The female brain has thick connections running from side to side with strong link between 2 hemispheres. Authors believe that recognizing the gender differences of the architecture of human brain helps to provide a potential neural basis as why men excel in certain tasks and women at others. On this slide, you can also see the difference in brain connectivity during the course of development. Slide B during the child, C during adolescent, and D during a young adult age period. The note colors representation are light blue color is the frontal area, cyan is the temporal area, green parietal area, and red occipital lobes. Authors reported that the study results suggest that male brain during the development are structured to facilitate connectivity between perception and coordinated action, whereas greater interhemispheric connectivity in female brain would facilitate integration of the analytical and sequential reasoning models of the left hemisphere with the spatial and intuitive processing of information of the right hemisphere. So before we start to talk about gender differences in skill performance, let's listen what is the media thoughts about female and male brain differences.
We treated them the same, but they were just so different. I don't just mean my kids, you'd see it in their friends too. The girls were, well, more civilized. They'd look you in the eye, talk to you. They cared about your feelings. The boys wanted to go to war. The girls cared more about playing with each other, talking, cooperating.
You'll be the princess.
There were plenty of exceptions, of course, but the pattern was clear. No matter how sex-neutral we parents tried to be, it just seemed obvious to me that boys' and girls' instincts are somehow different. And the author of The Power of the Female Brain agrees with that. That's neuroscientist Dr. Daniel Amen. And Dr. Amen, you conducted the biggest brain study ever done 46,000 brain scans and found what?
Female brains were dramatically more active in about 85% of the brain. Women are really wired for leadership, and if you look at the homes and you look at organizations like churches, they're often the leaders. They're clearly the health leaders. And if it wasn't for this thing called children that derails their careers, that they really make great CEOs. Women in our studies, and also I point this out in the book, they're better with things like empathy, intuition, collaboration, self-control.
So let's talk about language performance. Language performance is generally better among females than among males, even in children as young as 2-3 years old. Girls begin talking earlier, acquire vocabulary faster, show more spontaneous language. Also, small female advantage for verbal and written language persists through the school years and into adulthood. The areas of the Broca's and Wernicke's two brain areas that deal with language, they're larger in females. Females process language in both hemispheres, while males favor only to the left hemisphere. This activity across two hemispheres of the brain may result in the strong language skills typically displayed by females. Do the men and women process the language differently? To answer for this question, in 2008, study of young learners were performed in Northwestern University, and areas of the brain activation were identified during the language test. 62 children, including 31 girls, participated in functional MRI study, aged from 9 to 15 years old. Two language judgment tests were used, spelling and rhyming, and a visual and auditory version of each test were presented. The areas of brain activation during performance of two language tests across two modalities were identified. Areas are common to boys and girls, which on this slide showed in the yellow color. Included area implicated in language function, which is inferior frontal gyrus, known as the Broca's area, posterior superior temporal gyrus, Wernicke's area, inferior parietal lobule, and fusiform gyrus. Significantly greater activation has been demonstrated by girls bilaterally in inferior frontal gyrus, superior frontal temporal gyrus, and in left fusiform gyrus. Gender differences were also evident from activation in perceptual control tests. On upper slide, slide A, activation by non-linguistic visual stimuli showed great activation by girl, which pink color, right, in fusiform gyrus. And on slide B, activation by non-linguistic auditory stimuli showed great activation by girls in superior temporal gyrus. Boys did not show great activations in girls for perceptual stimuli in either modality. So the study result, according to this study, girls and boys process language differently. Girls have significantly greater activation in linguistic area of the brain. The result indicates that accurate performance among boys and girls depends on different brain regions, perhaps reflecting different approaches to linguistic processing despite extensive overlap in activated regions. Girls make language judgment based on linguistic content by accessing a common language network regardless of the sensory input, while performance accuracy in boys depends on the modality of the word presentation, either in visual or auditory association cortex. Also, such differences reflect early differences in processing language. Evidence does not currently suggest the differences in brain behavioral correlations persist into adulthood. Instead, such differences may disappear as the development of sensory processing in boys catches up to the girls, so that by adulthood, language processing in both sexes relies on the efficiency of the brain linguistic network. Considering that the result of this study, researchers proposed that the most effective way to study language for boys is to learn visually, so seeing written words or illustrations, as well as orally through listening and repetition. Reading performance. Data collected by PISA, which is Program for International Student Assessment, for 1 decade was analyzed in 2009, and including the mathematics and reading performance of nearly 1.5 million 15-year-olds in 75 countries. Across nations, boys scored higher than girls in mathematics by lower than girls in reading. The gender differences in reading was 3 times as larger as in mathematics. Boys score lower in reading in all nations in all 4 PISA assessments since 2000 to 2009. This slide represents gender differences in reading performance. So left side of the slide on the graph shows girls' reading performance, and right side, boys' reading performance. As you see, girls show significantly better reading performance than boys in all nations. Girls outperform boys by 39 score points in reading performance. Paradoxically, the gender differences in mathematics were consistently and strongly inversely correlated with gender differences in reading. So countries with smaller gender differences in mathematics had a larger gender differences in reading and vice versa. Dyslexia characterized by reading deficit, specifically for word decoding, which cannot be explained by a lack of intellectual ability or limited access to instruction. Dyslexia is highly heritable and 2 to 3 times more prevalent in males compared to females. Developmental dyslexia, characterized by unexpected reading difficulty, is associated with abnormal brain anatomy and function. Neuroimaging studies show less gray matter volume in dyslexic males within left hemisphere regions. Dr. Evans and her colleagues in 2014 proposed that gender-specific findings in dyslexia can be related to anatomical differences that exist between males and females in normal population. Study was conducted by comparing gray matter volume between dyslexic and non-dyslexic men and women, as well as scan of 32 dyslexic children and 32 typical readers were performed. Authors claim that it was the first investigation of gray matter volume in females with dyslexia conducted in both adults and children. This slide showed areas of the brain with decreased volume of gray matter in dyslexic group. The men with the blue color, boys green color with dyslexia exhibit less gray matter volume than the control group in left hemisphere region associated with language, as well as in right inferior parietal cortices. In women, red color, less gray matter volume in right hemisphere region within primary motor cortex and posterior parietal cortex. Additionally, girls, which is yellow color on this slide, show less gray matter volume in left hemisphere primary visual cortex. Researchers entertain the possibility that dyslexia in women is not characterized by involvement of the left hemisphere language regions like in men, but might be better associated by dysfunction and in domain some serving sensory processing and motor cortices, which is motor and premotor cortex, primary visual cortex. Those findings suggest that models of the brain basis of dyslexia primarily develop through the study of the male, may not be appropriate for females. Mathematical skills. Researchers have consistently concluded that males perform better on mathematics tests than females do. And looking for this slide, you can see that average SAT math test score was higher in males versus females since 1972 to 2013. Researchers became curious, can test scores measure the real differences in cognitive abilities and abilities to solve mathematical problems between females and males? In 1990, Hyde and colleagues used a meta-analysis to examine the gender differences in mathematical performance. More than 3 million subjects were included in meta-analysis. The result indicates that females outperform males by only a negligible amount. Females show superior performance for computation and understanding of mathematical concepts. For complex problem solving, males were slightly better. Age trends indicate that girls show a slightly superiority in computation in elementary school and middle school. There were no gender differences in problem solving in elementary or middle school, and differences favoring men emerge in high school and in the college. On this slide, you can see the data collected in 2009 by PISA, which indicates that boys outperform girls in mathematics in 35 of the 65 countries and economies, which represent approximately 1/3 of the top of the slide. In 25 countries, there is no significant difference between the gender, and in 5 countries, girls outperform boys. On average, boys outperform girls in mathematics by 12 score points. In countries like Belgium, Chile, Switzerland, United Kingdom, United States, Colombia, and Liechtenstein, boys outperform girls by more than 20 score points, close to 1/3 of the proficiency level. But this is a small gap compared to 39 points on average in favor of girls in reading performance. Still, in some countries, girls perform as well as boys in mathematics, and authors stated that maybe the counting stereotype that girls and women lack mathematical ability has often limited girls' opportunity. It was observed that women were superior while multitasking. This may be because the women wild the corpus callosum in the brain. In addition, the anterior commissure is 38% larger in females. This wide connection between the hemisphere may allow more information to pass in the female's brain than in the male's brain. Therefore, female can switch through thoughts faster than males can. However, these multitasking skills also might have been acquired through the female's everyday life. So who are better multitaskers? Women are known to multitask daily in their home lives. Therefore, this constant practice might have given their gender in age. Researchers reported that mothers spend 10 more hours a week multitasking compared with fathers, and that these additional hours are mainly related to time spent on housework and children care. Dr. Stott from University of Glasgow did a research study in 2013, and he performed the study of the gender differences in multitasking. As his results show that women are better than men in some type of multitasking, specifically when the tasks involved do not need to be carried out simultaneously. Men and women did not differ significantly in solving simple arithmetic problems, searching for a restaurant on the map, or answering general questions on the phone. But women were significantly better at devising strategies for location of the lost key. And this slide, actually I like it very much, This slide shows different strategies used by women and men for locating of the lost key. So what do you think, which one is the strategies used by women? One on the left looks like a flower, another one on the right looks like a car radiator. Okay, example is on the right, is from the female participants. Researchers state that male brain use almost 7 times more gray matter than women do, and female brain use almost 10 times more white matter. It may be relative to gender multitasking because gray matter areas are information and action processing centers. The gray matter areas of the brain can cause of tunnel vision concept, where the surrounding and other thoughts can be out of focus while performing in certain tasks. White matter areas are the networking center. It connects the gray matter to other processing centers. This causes a quick transition from task to task. This can also relate to how men are more focused on one task at the time and getting it more precise, while women quickly switch task to task and are not focused so much on getting the job done perfectly. The next slide will represent some very interesting information I wanted to share it with you. I found this article which was published in 2005 in British Journal of Psychiatry and made by Oxford researchers Yale and Young. Results show that liars have 22-26 increase in prefrontal white matter and 36-42 reduction in prefrontal gray-white ratio compared with both antisocial controls and normal controls. 39 participants were involved in this study, and 41 of them were males. Are men better multitaskers? So recent study of Mantila from Stockholm University drew the conclusion that men perform better than women in multitasking paradigm. So the finding of that study contrasts with the widely held belief that women are better at task switching. The study addresses gender differences in multitasking, specifically when tasks need to be carried out simultaneously. So men had an advantage over the women, and the degree of that advantage was directly related to men's advantage in spatial skills. But this type of multitasking is potentially less important to daily life context in which people often carry out tasks sequentially. So I take like 30 seconds break, and I want to tell you the story which I heard from Dr. Hendrick. At one of the days when Dr. Hendrick was doing ECT, and everything was prepared for the ECT, EEG was running, and they pressed the button, and actually no shock. So they have to reset everything from the beginning. And from second attempt, everything works. When procedure was done and Dr. Hendrick was walking away from one of the nurses, and he told her, well, interesting, like, it didn't work from first time. So nurse looked at his eyes and said, well, be your ECT machine is a man can perform more than one task at a time. Okay, it doesn't work anymore. Spatial abilities. Women often report difficulties with spatial tasks both in test and in the real life. The parietal region is thicker in the female's brain, making it harder for them to mentally rotate objects, which is important part of the spatial skills. Gender differences in favor of men in paper and pencil tests of mental rotation were well documented. Furthermore, this type of task produces some of the largest cognitive gender differences according to meta-analytical studies. Meta-analysis of gender differences in spatial abilities found that the average difference between men and women on the mental rotation test was 0.94, which represent very large effect, indicated that men perform nearly one standard deviation above the average performance in women. Another meta-analysis summarized research relevant to influence of the time limits on gender differences in paper and pencil task and mental rotation. Results show that gender differences in mental rotation are significantly larger when the task is administered with a time limitation compared to when such limitations are absent. What are the factors which can influence these differences? It can be environmental and socio-cultural factors, performance factors. Researchers found that increasing the difficulty of the task or setting a time limit resulted in greater gender differences in spatial abilities in favor of the males. Biological exploration of the factors involved in mental rotation includes studies of cerebral involvement. Brain imaging studies often suggest mental rotation involves activation of parietal regions. There is also some evidence of activation of motor areas of the brain. Functional MRI found increased activation of the parietal lobe, but also the middle frontal gyrus and the premotor cortex. Some results suggest that mental rotation engages cortical areas not only involved in direct perceptions, but brain areas involved in tracking objects in motion and encoding spatial relations. The hormonal environments of men and women may play the role as well. For example, cognitive performance differences do not emerge between boys and girls until early adolescence, which is consistent with hormonal theories. And also, it is possible that gender differences simply increase as a function of biological development. Does the spatial abilities related to culture? Study of spatial abilities of two tribes in India, the Hashi and Karbi, performed in 2010. The Karbi are patrilineal tribe and Hashi are matrilineal tribe. Both live right next to each other in the hill of northeastern India, and genetically they are closely related. But culturally, the Karbi are patrilineal. Property and status is passed down from father to son, with women owning no land on their own. The Hashi are matrilineal, with men forbidden to own land. Moreover, Hashi women also get just as much education as men, while Karbi ones get much less. The authors took about 1,200 people from 8 villages and got them to do the jigsaw puzzle, which you can see on this slide. The quicker you do it, the better your spatial abilities. Here is the result. In the patrilineal group, women did substantially worse on average. Remember that more time means worse. In the matrilineal society, they perform as well as men. Well, tiny bit worse, but it was not significant. So authors stated, our paper shows that the gender gap in spatial abilities in the tasks that we study interact with culture. In the matrilineal society, we observe no gender differences in this task. This result shows that nurture plays an important role in the gender gap in spatial abilities. But other researchers argued that even it was a large study and the result was statistically very strong, however, there is a problem that this study essentially only has 2 data points. One society is matrilinear, it has low gender differences in visual spatial processing, and one is patrilineal, it has high differences. The researchers said that's not enough data to conclude that there is a correlation of causal relationship between the two. According to National Institute of Health and National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, 25.3 million American adults suffer from daily pain, and 23.4 American adults report a lot of pain. It is well known and well documented that many clinical pain disorders disproportionately affect women. Karen Berkeley in 1998 documented that almost half of the 78 clinical pain disorders reviewed had a female bias, whereas just under a third had a male bias. Researchers indicate that women experience greater clinical pain, suffer greater pain-related distress, and show heightened sensitivity to experimentally induced pain compared with men. They have an elevated prevalence in many chronic pain conditions, including headache, fibromyalgia, irritable bowel syndrome, arthritis. Biological, cultural, physiological, and social factors are all thought to contribute to these disparities in pain responses, reporting, and management. This slide represents basic pain matrix model, and it's included in blue areas structures in the sensory discriminative pain pathway, which included thalamus, primary, secondary, somatosensory cortex. Orange area represent common structures identified in affective motivational pain pathway, is anterior cingulate cortex and insula, and the green region represent one component of the cognitive evaluative pain system, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Do brain of women and men respond to pain differently? In 1998, Paulson and colleagues demonstrated greater responses in the anterior insula, thalamus, a prefrontal activation in the left hemisphere and female subject, and show prefrontal activation in the right hemisphere in the male subject using noxious heat. In 2003, Mayer found several areas of male and female brain activated differently when given the same pain stimulus. The female brain showed greater activity in limbic regions, which are emotion-based centers, and in men, the cognitive regions or analytical centers showed greater activity. The authors suggested that men's cognitive areas may be more highly triggered because of the early male role in defending the home, where in response to stress and pain, the brain launches a calculated fight or flight reaction. And the female limbic region may be more responsive under threat because of their importance in triggering and nurturing and protecting a response for the youngs, leading to a more emotion-based response in facing pain and the stress. In the study of Nalibov and colleagues performed in 2003, we found that mildly painful stimuli produced activation of the left thalamus and ventral striatum only in men. During anticipation and uncomfortable non-painful stimuli, men showed greater activation in areas of the insula. In women, areas of amygdala and mid-cingulate were deactivated during uncomfortable and mild pain stimuli, respectively. Other study performed by Dr. Khanna and colleagues in 2013 demonstrated that women have higher pain sensitivity and prevalence of chronic visceral pain conditions, such as functional gastrointestinal disorders in men. in 16 males and 16 female healthy subject, functional MRI have been performed during anticipation and pain induced by esophageal distension at pain toleration level. During anticipation, the pain brain areas where women demonstrated greater brain activity compared with men were supplementary motor area, precuneus, secuneus. During the pain, women demonstrated greater activation compared with men in the anterior insula, dorsal anterior cingulate area, premotor cortex, cingulate gyrus, and posterior cerebellum. During the pain anticipation, men demonstrated greater brain activity in the left parahippocampal gyrus and in the cerebellum, and showed decrease in brain activity in the right amygdala. Women show significantly greater decrease in brain activity in right amygdala than men, and women produces greater brain activity than men in right supplementary motor area, precuneus, secuneus. The paternal brain activity suggests that during anticipation, women may demonstrate stronger limbic inhibition, which is considered to be a cognitive modulation strategy for impending pain stimulation. During the pain, men demonstrated greater brain activity in the supplementary motor area and decreased activity in left caudate. Women produce greater brain activity than men in the left insula, mid-cingulate cortex, and posterior cerebellum. So during the pain, women significantly activate brain areas associated with the affective and motivation component of the pain. These responses may underlie the gender differences that exist in pain conditions. Generally, women may attribute more emotional importance to painful stimuli compared with men. Let's talk about the relationship between chronic pain and brain gray matter volume. Several studies of chronic pain patients, including fibromyalgia, have shown gray matter atrophy of brain areas associated with sensory and affective pain processing. Analysis of gray matter changes in chronic pain patients have shown inconsistent results, whereas most studies have demonstrated gray matter atrophy of the prefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate cortex, insula, and thalamus. Other reported increased gray matter in the basal ganglia and other brain areas. These inconsistencies may be related to functional differences between pain conditions, but also to subject variability and analytical technique. Also, the mechanism for these gray matter changes are currently unclear. They may contribute to some of the core features of chronic disorder, including affective disturbances and chronic widespread pain. Robinson in 2010 performed functional MRI and found that fibromyalgia patients had significantly less gray matter volumes than normal control in 3 brain regions, which included left mid-insula, left dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, and left rostral cingulate cortex. This graph shows areas of gray matter volume differences on this fibromyalgia and normal control patient. In this slide, you can see in detail the pain-related brain areas of decreased gray matter densities. This area includes left rostral anterior cingulate cortex in blue color, mid-anterior cingulate cortex in green color, as well as left mid-insula in yellow color. Stress. Can you imagine you walking alone in the dark alley late at night when all of a sudden you feel the barrel of the gun pressed on the back of your neck and hear the voice saying, "Give me your wallet or I will kill you." So what do? The answer is it depends on whether you are a man or a woman. If you are a man, you either run away as quick as you can, or you turn around and punch the guys in the face. If you are a woman, you try to talk to the guy and say, are you sure you want to do this? Or if you put the gun away, we can talk about the situation and I will see what I can do to help you. When faced with stressful situation, men usually employ fight or flight tactics, while women use attend or befriend tactics. And Dr. Mary Miller was talking about this response like a few weeks ago in her grand round presentations. So fight or flight responses is a sequence of internal processes that prepares the organism for struggle or escape. While tend and befriend model is stress response model proposing that males are biologically predisposed to respond to stress by nurturing and protecting offspring and seeking social support. The hypothesis that stress responses in men may be primarily characterized as fight or flight is supported by observation that right parietal frontal cortex activation and left orbital frontal cortex deactivation with stress is predominantly observed in the male brain. Just to remind you that right parietal frontal cortex is an important part of both the negative emotion and vigilance system, and left orbital frontal cortex is associated with positive emotion and hedonic goals. Involvement of the limbic system included ventral striatum, putamen, insula, and cingulate cortex underlies the stress response in females and is more consistent with the tend and befriend model. Stress response is associated with manifestation of various psychosomatic and psychiatric disorder. Individual differences in stress reactivity have been proposed as potentially important risk factor for gender-specific health problem in men and women. Hypothalamo-pituitary adrenal axis is a common finding in hyperactivity is a common findings in major depression, social phobia, panic disorder, generalized anxiety, and obsessive compulsive disorder. And majority of these disorders are prevalent in women. Different diagnostic subtypes of depression may be characterized by different types of stress system pathology. Melancholic depression is associated with HPA axis hyperactivity, and on another hand, a typical depression associated with HPA axis downregulation. Specific type of chronic difficulties such as caring for relatives with dementia can be associated with increased cortisol secretion. Study found lowered plasma tryptophan levels and increased cortisol secretion in carriers of patients with clinical dementia. So this slide, it shows stress response pathway. Another name of people know is it's hypothalamo-pituitary adrenal axis pathway. This pathway is activated by stress directly on the level of the hypothalamus or indirectly on the left or on the level of the amygdala. The hypothalamus produces and releases corticotropin releasing factor, and local stimulation of CRF type 1 receptors result in additional release of corticotropin releasing factor. This creates a feed-forward loop which facilitates and rapid response to stressors. So we continue to this pathway. Corticotropin releasing factor stimulate pituitary, which release corticotropin. Corticotropin stimulate adrenal glands, which stimulate and produce stress hormone cortisol. Chronic elevation of this hormone can negatively impact our mental and physical health, including memory, sleep, depression, metabolism, immune system, wound healing, electrolyte balance, and more than that. In 2013, Dr. Ben Gasser and colleagues found sex differences between corticotropin-releasing factor receptors in the brain on males and female rodents in response to the stress, which they believe would help better understand the gender gap in depression and anxiety disorder and how to treat them. The study showed that after the stress, females had more CRF receptors on the surface of the target cells, making them very responsive to the stress hormone later on. In male rats exposed to stress, some of CRF receptors moved from the membrane to internal part of the nerve cell or neuron. With fewer CRF receptors on the surface, the male rodents could better cope with similar stress in the future. Researchers propose that because females don't pull back on the number of exposed CRF receptors following a stressful event, their brain may be more responsive to high level of corticotropin-releasing factors. Researchers found that corticotropin-releasing factors worked in several brain regions, included part of the prefrontal cortex, a brain area linked to attention and planning, the amygdala area that control fear and emotional responses, and hippocampus, which is essential to forming new memories. Their preliminary findings suggest that corticotropin-releasing factor activates this brain network differently in males and females, and gender differences in how corticotropin-releasing factor regulates the brain may explain in part why women may be more vulnerable than men to stress-related conditions. Summary. Overall, the female brain is smaller than male brain. Women excel in language performance, reading abilities, multitasking compared with men. Many clinical pain disorders disproportionately affect women, perhaps due to greater activation of different brain regions compared with men. Women more vulnerable to stress-related conditions. They respond to stress by increasing activity in brain regions involved with emotion, which may explain increased incidence of mood disorder. I would like to express my special thanks of gratitude to my teacher and mentor, Dr. John Hendrick. Thank you very much for helping me with Grand Round presentation and preparation to today's Grand Rounds, as well as for his patience as we went through the presentation multiple times. And secondly, I want to thank my friend and colleague, Dr. Reagan Gilly, who helped to design PowerPoint slides for today's presentation. Thank you both of you. Questions? No questions? Thank you very much.
That was really a really great overview. Certainly a lot of new things and a lot of evidence there. I had just a couple of questions. You had so much data, so it may be difficult to remember back, but a couple of things I wondered about was you talked about the groups in India, the matrilineal versus the patrilineal. And one of the things I noticed was that in the patrilineal, both boys and girls took longer to do the puzzle. In the matrilineal, although the difference wasn't any significant between the boys and girls, they still did it faster when the matrilineal families. So is that suggestive that when it's a matrilineal focus, there's perhaps more teaching equally perhaps to both genders so that the difference there is not as much? Versus is there a bias in the patrilineal that perhaps the boys are getting more of the teaching of whatever is involved in that kind of spatial task resolution? The other thing I wondered about was you talked about cortisol being one of the parameters in the women when they have stress and could increase mood issues. But we know, cortisol and stress affects other physical illness as well. Yet women have higher longevity. I know there could be a whole bunch of other things, hormonal difference, whatever. But I just wonder if there's anything that suggested why, since women are often doing a lot more of the sandwich, role, caretaking, et cetera, may experience a lot more stress, if we still have the longevity higher with women than with men.
Well, related to your first question about patrilinear, matrilinear, yes, the slide shows that in patrilinear, it actually takes more time than in matrilinear. I didn't find any explanation, to be honest, in that article. And to be honest, I didn't pay much attention. Only I saw the difference between men and females, which actually was the main goal of the presentation, to show that differences. Considering your second question about cortisol and the longevity, so I would say, probably in my personal opinion, considering like men's job more stressful than female job, maybe it's a reason why they express to the less stress and live longer. I hope I answered your question.
I know there were quite a few things that you had to eliminate from the talk, but I think a very interesting theory in biology is that genetically what happens is in childhood, as brain development occurs, the child brain is changed dramatically at pubescence when sex hormones come into play. And I wonder if you came across information about how sex hormones change the developmental size of various regions between male and female brain, because obviously at pubescence there's a split, most of the time at least, between the two sexes.
Right. As you notice, after our first review of my slides and information, it was very big part of the presentation which were related to hormonal influences for the development of the brain. As we decided to do it as a second presentation of the female brain, which would be related specifically only to hormonal influences for brain development and brain changes, specifically in females, like during the menstrual cycle. So I generally didn't concentrate much on that information in this time, but during my next presentation, like I said, I will answer for more questions which is related to hormonal influences for brain development and the difference between hormonal influence for the male and female brain.
Well, I commend you too. That was really a great job. And so my question is about the difference in math abilities. If I understood your presentation correctly, you said that it was during high school and college years that the gender difference really presented itself, that prior to that, the math abilities of females was more similar. And
Right.
I just wondered what speculations you have on that as far as the role of culture versus hormonal changes and things like that.
Well, again, I probably avoid to talk about hormonal changes during today's presentation. Like, it will be additional, and like I said, I didn't concentrate on hormonal changes. But in general, I went across, during this preparation, the multiple articles about math abilities. And if we talk about articles, like I would say 15, 20 years ago, all of them, with very rare exception, we're talking about better male performance in mathematical abilities compared with females. But over the time, we see the economy progress and females involve more in job related to using their skills, abilities, and get access more to be like scientists, for example, and do the math, they show much better abilities, which were reflected in more recent study. And the most recent study actually showed the negligible differences between females and males in math performance. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure to see you. Thank you. Thanks.